So, hello, welcome. So we've made it through most of the bill day. We're kind of rounding out the end. This is going to be a panel, so there's going to be a collection of speakers. Chris and Tamara and I are going to sort of be cycling back and forth, answering different parts of what we find to be a really compelling and fairly complicated process. So just as a little bit of background, we're part of an organization / project called Thinking With, which is committed to empathy-based design for social good. And we want to help answer the question, what is the connection between empathy, design, and social justice? And so we're going to spend a little time taking those up individually, and then each of us is going to take off one of those intersection points and discuss what they see as the connection between two parts of that triangle. And then in the end, we'll share what our project is, kind of the model that it works. But to be perfectly honest with you, we're very new, and so we're very much looking forward to having some feedback, you telling us ideas that you think you have for connections, possible projects, other processes we could engage, things like that. So I want to start with just asking you all, when you define design, what is it? What is design to you?
Everything is design.
It's an intentional creation, I guess.
Chris, what's your definition
One,
of design?
I think one way that we can see design is that you can use knowledge to change your perspective to solve problems. That's a nice, simple definition, right?
Cool. So does anybody have definitions of empathy? Do you know what empathy is?
I would say seeing from somebody else's perspectives what the best thing is for everybody in the long run.
Right, yeah, exactly. So empathy is sharing life with other people, not just saying that you understand what they're going through, you actually also experience it in some way yourself. So it's kinship, as we like to call it.
And what is social justice? Somebody throw out a definition of social justice. Yeah.
An effort to get everybody on the same playing field with regards to like where they start caring for marginalized groups instead of dismissing marginalized groups.
For sure.
Maybe a good working definition.
Another definition, how would you define social justice?
Fairness.
Fairness? Yeah, absolutely. Fairness in groups. One of the ways I say it is everybody wants to make the world a better place. This is just sort of true of most people. But social justice is taking up that question of how can you make it better for people for whom the world sucks the most, right? So that's design, empathy, and social justice. To kick off this intersectional event, Chris is going to talk to us about what he sees as the connection between empathy and design.
Right. So we said that empathy is about understanding other people and being in their shoes to understand their situations, right? So how does that tie into design? Well, first, maybe we can look at like what used to be considered creative thinking, right? Traditional forms of brainstorming involved sitting in a room, thinking, identifying problems, and then thinking of solutions to those problems, right? You can throw out whatever you want. You can be creative, and you can have people cover all the different aspects of the issue you're trying to solve. But there are inherent backdrops to this approach, and one of those backdrops is biases can easily get into those solutions when you don't have the people you're designing for in the same room with you. So there's an actual creative movement going on in the institutions and education and business called design thinking, and it reverses the traditional process where it says, let's include the people we're designing for in the design process for their own solutions. So it's more a facilitative approach to help them discover their own creative genius, rather than saying, I know how to solve your problems better than you do. I know you better than you know yourself, which is a form of paternalism that can be avoided, right? And so like there's one example is like a civil engineer is designing the walkways for a university campus, and they're like, oh, do we use grid lines? Do we go diagonally from the buildings? Do we wrap the buildings in like walkways so people can walk around the buildings? But then the civil engineer was like, well, we're designing for the students. Maybe they should be the ones designing these walkways. How can we do that? Well, they ended up laying grass across the entire university for an entire year, and they let the students wear pads into the grass with their schedules every day, and it formed the walkway, and that's where they laid the concrete. And so that's design thinking. That's empathy with design, including the students in the design process for their own solutions. And so in these institutions, educational institutions, universities, they're opening up these design labs where they're creative spaces that facilitate the flow of ideas. Like there's whiteboards everywhere, everything's on rollers, you can move everything around, things are waist height so that people are not encouraged to sit down so that you can have people moving around collaborating with each other. And that's sort of how this is embodied in the changes that we're seeing. And so people in the university solidify this into like a 5-step process where you first, instead of coming up with ideas, you empathize first, get to know the people you're working with. Then you define the problems more acutely, and then you go to the drawing board. Rather than going to the drawing board from the very beginning, you will have gained the input from the people you're designing for, and then you can prototype your designs and test them in the field.
Tell us a story about the birthing beds that got sent to Africa.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm running short on time, so I have to keep it. I'll have to give a summary. But at the design school at Stanford, these students were required to form a startup for a social justice cause by the end of the semester, and so they were assigned infant mortality rates in India, and so they went to Nepal. At first, they started to study online. They're like researching, the baby incubators are too expensive. People can't buy them. The babies are dying when they're born prematurely. And they're like, okay, well, let's just work on getting the baby incubators to be more efficient, cost-wise, logistics-wise. All we have to do is redesign the incubator, right? Well, then they ended up taking a trip to Nepal because the design thinking process says you got to empathize first, right? You got to go to the people you're designing for. And they got there and they realized that there were baby incubators everywhere in the hospital, thousands of them just sitting around unused. And these were incubators that were donated from corporations to these hospitals. And they asked the physicians, like, what's going on? Why aren't people using this? And it's like, well, the moms are in villages 30 miles away and they don't have any transportation. They have no way of getting to the hospitals. Like, oh, we would have never thought that was the problem. We thought it was the incubators the whole time. And so they ended up working with the moms in the villages to create this little sleeping pouch for the babies. And they're like nice and little snug sleeping pouches, nice and warm. But another example in this same story is that the moms didn't trust medicine from the developed world because they saw it as a form of imperialism. And so when the doctors told them to heat the baby warmers up to 37 degrees Celsius, they only heated them up to 30 degrees Celsius because they considered medicine from the United States to be overpowered. And so they found that they could fix this by making a more subjective meter. Instead of having exact measurements, they could make it color-coded so that when the baby incubator turns green, then the moms know that it's a sufficient temperature to keep the babies warm. So those are some of the stories we like to tell when we try to explain like this different view of design and creative thinking combined with empathy and being in other people's shoes.
Cool. So we are huge fans of really smart, empathic design processes like this. And the cool thing is we're here at BIL, and BIL seems to embody a lot of these values in the way that they design. A lot of what BIL does is focused toward positive social change. But the truth is that a lot of innovation in today's world isn't focused toward that. A lot of today's innovation is focused toward making money, and it's built around a premise that asks the question, cool, what are we creating next? What's the next biggest, best thing? What's going to make the most profit? When really we should be asking questions like, are we creating this for the right reasons? Or sometimes should we even be creating this at all? Because sometimes, and if we look to modern design, a lot of the time what happens is that it creates as many problems as it solves. And this is something that we see happening a lot with the environment nowadays. So this is something that we see very prevalent. But the key question that we should be asking is whose lives are we improving and whose problems are we solving? Are we solving the problem of homelessness in upper white class communities, or are we helping to solve the problems, the everyday problems of our homeless neighbors? Are we improving the lives of some at the cost of the well-being of others? And these are the things that we really need to look at when we're designing, because if we're not prioritizing the well-being of everybody, then what kind of design are we really working toward? So what we believe at Thinking With is that it's not enough just to innovate, because transformations unguided by the good are not good enough to really create the social change and social justice that we need to see. This is where design and social justice necessarily must intersect in order to have positive, true change. And we have a ton of, it seems like, endless problems in today's world, but the cool thing is that we also have limitless innovation possibilities, and we also have millions of hands with which to do good work to improve these problems. But the problem is, it's not that people aren't helping. We have plenty of people helping. There's a lot of charity going on, which is awesome. We love charity. There's people hungry now who need to be fed. But the thing is that if you don't eventually cut off the spout that's spewing out those problems, then you're just going to have endless problems forever. So one of my favorite stories that has to do with this is it comes from a book title called Living Downstream. And the title Living Downstream, that image comes from a parable about a village that lives along a river. So one day the villagers start seeing these bodies floating downstream, and they see all these drowning people. So the villagers think, oh my God, we got to fix this problem. We got to rush into action. So thinking they're all heroic, these villagers start thinking of these really exotic, random, innovative ways to resuscitate people. But in the midst of their heroism, these people don't think to just simply look upstream to see who's pushing the people into the river. So sometimes the solutions that we really need are systematic. We really just need to get to the roots of these problems. And charity, while it's amazing and necessary, it's not enough. And sometimes, as in that case, charity can sometimes get caught up in as part of the problem. So what we find is that while systematic change sounds awesome, and it's like, yeah, cool, let's change the system. It's hard. You have to work at a lot of levels. It's a lot of different systems and people that you have to go through. And it takes more than just charity. It takes creative, strategic, and collaborative design to really get this done. It takes smart, empathic designs. So that's where we come in, and that's where what we really strive for in our thinking. Yeah, that's what we strive for in creating social justice.
So I've got the last little piece, which is looking at the connection between social justice and empathy. And if you're paying attention, that's like the last little piece of the triangle. So what is empathy? It's a communicative process between two persons or multiple persons wherein you share your life with another. Now, the process of empathy is at least twofold. Part of it is perceptual. It means looking out and seeing something that's going on in the life of the other. But it also involves an affective, an emotional component. You have to see, but also connect to something that's happening inside that person. Now, some of that is very reflexive. If I were to get kicked all of a sudden by Chris, there's a part of you that would trigger neurologically that would kind of help you empathize with me as you would sort of like pre-reflexively experience what it's like to being kicked. But there's also, so that's like a mirror neuron part of the empathic process. But there's also an imaginative part of empathy, and it's called mentalizing. And it's basically reconstructing what it might be like inside the lived experience of that other person. And that's the opposite of reactive. That's very imaginative and intentional. So that's empathy. What is social justice? We had a couple definitions already. I like to say improving the world for people who the world is hardest on. That's referred to as the maxi-mini principle, making the maximum amount of change for the people who have the least. Rawls has got one of my favorite definitions of justice. He says that social justice is driven by fairness, and actually that's the word you used, and that fairness is this blend between freedom and equity, and that if you just equal everybody out in a way that doesn't give them choice, that doesn't actually lead towards flourishing. So you need to allow for human choice and agency for them to shape the choices that they want, but that you need to create conditions where all people have fair access to those opportunities. So instead of me telling each of the 15 people in this room, this is how your lives have to be because I'm going to equalize it, it's creating the opportunities where all kinds of social combinations can come to the fore. So how do these connect? I find that social justice can be a really abstract idea. It's systematic, so that's part of the reason that it's abstract, but it's also, I mean, Rawls, he's a philosopher, right? So this is political science. It can be a very abstract notion. And so one of the things that's super cool about empathy is that it helps deepen our experience of social justice issues. There's a fancy term for this. It's called solidarity. And basically, the notion is that I can see more deeply into the landscape of society if I start to erode the boundaries of meaning between myself and others in ways that help me radically transform my perception of self and others such that I come to see my lot as theirs and their lot as mine. And suddenly what was systematic and structural becomes more neighborly or personal, or the kind of thing that we get the kind of indignation that we experience when we're looking at something bad happening to a member of our own family. And that it is at that place where I find that empathy and social justice sort of most beautifully come together. Another term that we often use is the notion of kinship, or basically moving towards a perspective of shared humanness that has the opportunity and the potential to reconstitute the social order. And that ultimately, while we are talking about social problems, of course, the communicative intersection of our lives is part of social problems because of that whole social part, right? And so that empathy, seeing the human in the other, is actually the first step of justice, because it was us who dehumanized them in the first place, right? And so as we come to have more just communicative modes, that enables us to come up with more intelligent solutions to problems that threaten us. But it is itself the first step of what? A just social order, one where we see each other as fully human. So a word to the wise, empathy can fail. And I think that that's an important thing that when looking at this intersection is important to keep in mind. And that when I think about your life, sometimes I'm wrong. And so sometimes when I think, oh, look, I'm looking into your life and I notice this problem that you have, that can be projective, it can be paternalistic, I can identify the wrong problem, I can identify a problem that when I mention it, you're actually offended that you think that I have that problem at all. I do a lot of work in and around homeless issues, and people say, people trying to give me a home when I want to be a traveler that's not compassionate, right? And so empathy does drive social justice, but it's important to recognize that empathy is not this perfect, like, oh, I've been empathic. I thought about what was going on inside the life of this other person. And because of that, it really needs to involve a more systematic, ongoing, dynamic interaction between you and the person that you're engaging in. You can't just sit around and couchbook imagine what it's like to be this other person and then invent stuff for them, as informed by Chris's talk. So having articulated each of the individual legs of this triangle, we now kind of want to move into a second phase of the talk, which is kind of pitching to you our design, what Thinking With is as a project, and what we see some of the future potentials are and some of the past projects that we've worked on. And we'll just sort of cycle around as we tell you different parts of that, and then we'll open it up for questions and also feedback on that model.
Thinking With is something we founded actually within the last year and a half. It's something that we really just got going within the last year. And Thinking With, in a nutshell, is a creative problem-solving group for social justice. So what that looks like in practice is a bunch of people from different walks of life, different fields. We are all joined by our membership at a university. So Tim's a professor, we're students. And what we found is that our university, while it's awesome, and it actually is one of the ones that is very, very good at emphasizing social justice in everything they do, a lot of the branches are very fragmented, and we have so many resources that can be used, so many very intelligent people who are intelligent in a variety of fields that aren't currently working together. And we realized that when solving problems, it's not only important to empathize with the people you're working with, you also need a variety of perspectives to have thorough solutions that are not going to fail on one end. So we were looking at solutions, for example, that failed. Chris is engineering, I'm communication studies, from like a chemistry or whatever. What is Jeremy?
Civil engineering.
Oh, that failed from a civil engineering standpoint. And we were like, oh, well, we wouldn't have known that because we didn't have a civil engineer in the room. We had 2 people in the room. So what we try to do is bring a bunch of people together to solve problems, including the people who are trying to solve problems for.
And I would add to that part of our model is to intentionally connect the people who are not communicating with each other to improve that aura of solidarity that we seek, as Tim mentioned, which is part of empathy and social justice in the first place, is to bring communities together and to break down the barriers between the different organizations. So why not bring them together by helping them tackle the problems that are related to each of their fields?
So tell them about SPY.
Oh yeah, so one of the projects that we're working on is in collaboration with Safe Place for Youth, which is in Venice. They help homeless youth from the age range of 18 to 25. They just acquired a new space right on Lincoln, and they are in the process of rearranging that space to facilitate the work that they do with the youth themselves. to facilitate case management, the services that they deliver, making it a drop-in center for the youth so that they can take naps, they can get food, they can be a part of programs, they can get access to educational resources. And part of the things that part of the work that we're going to offer to them is to help them reimagine how they can design that space to facilitate more effective communication, and also to help them maximize the use of their space by giving it multiple uses so that they can rearrange it in the ways that they see fit. But the key is that we are not going to give them answers as the conventional management consulting model offers. We are going to help facilitate the answers that that are already present in their organization, so that, again, we avoid that paternalistic model and we say, like, you have the answers, but we recognize that you're just really busy all the time writing grants, running the organization, taking care of problems, but we can give you that extra resource of human beings with minds to help bring those answers out of you, to help you discover new solutions.
Tell them about the walkthrough. So they are a super awesome organization and very, very open. And they started designing workshops with the youth that they served as feedback, but they're so busy and working and doing good work that they had never went, well, we have this problem, we're trying to design this space, we have these youth who have a voice, and so we just said, well, why don't we walk the youth through this new space and engage them in the problem-solving process? And they were like, that sounds awesome. So these are simple things, right? Simple projects. It's really ultimately pretty straightforward ideas. If you're going to solve a problem, involve the people that the solution exists for. But we exist in a world where folks are so busy, it's hard to, come by that. And so we're helping them design their program by engaging the people that they're actually serving.
Yeah, so a lot of I think the final part to this is that we do a lot of networking. So in order to make this happen, we end up speaking with as many organizations as people as possible, collecting contact information, finding out what everybody's working on in different projects. So whether it's organizations at our school, nonprofits in Los Angeles, other universities, then when we have a project, for example, working on homelessness, we can say, oh, okay, we know this university is working on new innovations for homelessness. We know this student organization emphasizes in homelessness, and they have a lot of knowledge about this. So we can bring everybody together and be more effective in solving problems. So we don't actually have to do a lot of the work. We end up connecting people so that they have these long-term relationships that they can continuously be getting designs and work from.
So, closing thoughts?
Yeah, and I would add to that, I guess conceptually, that we're like the organization that moves between the other organizations, which allows us to work on a lot of different social justice issues at the same time, working on things in parallel rather than a linear fashion. So that way we can, that it helps bring all those people together to accomplish those goals.
Which is what we want to do now. So we're going to shut up for now. Yeah. And if you have questions from us about the model or projects that we've worked on, that's super awesome. But to be perfectly honest, the reason we're here at BIL is because BIL is full of innovative, intelligent, empathic people who imagine what better worlds look like. And so if you have thoughts or reflections for us, and want to say, Chris, Tim, and Tam, consider this, or think about this, or do you know this group of people working on this project, or what about this idea? So anyway, open the floor.